Thank you for joining me today on The Midpoint. I'm pleased to welcome the Executive Director of the Toledo Museum of Art, Adam Levine. He returned to Toledo earlier this year to take on the leadership of the museum right before the effects of COVID-19 hit us in the Midwest. I'm excited to learn more about the role of art and what creative opportunities may emerge despite these times of constraints. Thank you for joining me on The Midpoint today, Adam.
Thanks so much for having me, Ruth.
Yeah, we're really glad to be able to connect with the museum director and to be able to talk a little bit about the future of art and museums and what is the future of everything given COVID-19.
Well, if I knew the answers to that, then I would be doing a lot of other things too, right? But I'll do my best.
Great. Well, we can all project a little bit, imagine together.
That's right.
Well, first of all, how does it feel to be back in Toledo? You were away for a little bit.
Yeah, so I was in Toledo for 6 years previously in a series of different positions at the museum, including deputy director and curator of ancient art, before leaving to go to Jacksonville, Florida. So even though, as we were just discussing, I'm originally from New York, Toledo feels like home. 6 years is a pretty significant portion of my life.
Yeah.
My fiance is from here. So this is an intentional decision, both to be at the Toledo Museum of Art, which is such an exceptional place, but also to be in Toledo and to raise our family here and to make this place home forever. It's an amazing community. I know I don't need to tell you that. So it feels great. And in spite of the oddness of this moment, beginning to feel settled.
And so you are now the 10th director of Toledo Museum of Art and one of the youngest, I believe, or maybe the youngest. And you were selected earlier this year and maybe a month after, really, the pandemic hit. So did you have any initial goals that are now kind of drastically changed, or how are you adapting?
So it's a great question. So first, one sort of mild corrective, which is so Brian Kennedy was the 9th director of the Toledo Museum and departed, I think, about a year ago to take on the role of the directorship at the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, Massachusetts. And he was succeeded by John Stanley, who also has a long and distinguished tradition or history in Toledo and originally. And he did such an extraordinary job helming the ship during that time, including the outset of COVID-19. That the board sort of retroactively classified him the 10th director. So while I was announced as the 10th director, I am in fact the 11th director, in part because John deserved this rich recognition. So yes, certainly I was announced in January, and at that point in Florida, we were beginning to track COVID-19 when I was at my previous job. But no one in America thought it was going to have the impact that it had at that point. Over the course of February, I think it became clear that we were grappling with a global pandemic, the effects of which really became clear in March. So as that has escalated, of course, so too have expectations around museum closure, handling of that, and all of the sequence of activities you can imagine normally accompanies a new director into his or her their role had to be adapted. So the short answer to your question is we're doing a lot of meetings still with community stakeholders, with museum supporters, with staff. Most of it's mediated through a screen.
Yeah.
But that also provides you with a different set of opportunities. This medium doesn't really lend itself to large group meetings. So there are many fewer receptions, but there are a lot more intimate conversations. So I would say, while I've probably not been able to touch as many people as I might have otherwise, there are huge opportunities to go deeper. And I feel like the quality of the information that these conversations are yielding is incredibly helpful. And that's sort of the final part of the answer to your question, which is the anticipated first 100 days of my tenure was all about listening, having conversations broadly with every level of staff, with every level of volunteer, with every person and every community stakeholder that we could get on my schedule, to learn as much as I could about this community and try and assimilate that into our eventual strategic plan. So while I'm listening over the phone and by Zoom and not in person, the listening has not been interrupted.
Wow, yes. And certainly, as you said, the conversation can be much deeper through this kind of mediated screen somehow. Do you picture that these kind of deeper engagements will lead to more creative exhibitions, and will that be happening online for the future of museums?
Yeah, so that's another really interesting question. So the depth of the conversations, I think, arises from the fact that the nature of remote work requires you to have smaller groups.
Right.
So a 30-minute meeting with 10 people only has 3 minutes per person. A 30-minute meeting with 5 people has 6, and so on and so forth. So because the technology sort of inhibits group size, you end up having these deeper, richer conversations. So just to be clear, I would much rather be meeting you in person. So sort of with that said, yeah, I mean, I think the idea here is it is too early to have a strategic plan because the strategic plan needs to be community consulted. That is why we are having these broad conversations to try and put our fingers as a management team, not just on what TMA should be doing, but also what Toledo needs. Right? The Toledo Museum of Art is an anchor institution in this community.
Right.
So our highest and best use is engaging art and art history in ways that align with community needs. So I do think that the conversations we're having are going to lend themselves to vibrancy and to relevance in our exhibition schedule. But I also think that your specific question was around the creativity of exhibitions, and we have a great small team of curators that needs to be grown and augmented, but a really great creative group of curators that are working through the shows that we are putting on. But yes, this broad community consultation will absolutely factor into exhibition decision making. And as far as the technology goes, it's a fascinating question. I think one of the things that COVID-19 has demonstrated across industries is that investment in digital is important, if for no other reason than resilience. And a lot of the change management around transitioning to digital was taken care of by necessity. And a lot of it's going to stick around to stay, right? Flexible schedules, working from home. Exhibitions, I think less so, honestly. I think that there are some interesting digital solutions that are out there. And I think museums that have invested in digital for a very long time, like the Met or MoMA or the Tate,
Right.
have really positioned themselves to use their archives and digital platforms well. But I also think there's no facsimile for going to an art museum and standing in front of the work of art. And the digital experiences are better than nothing, but they're a lot clunkier than the physical experience. And in moments of newness, right? I mean, this is an experience none of us have ever lived through.
Right.
It's very difficult to extrapolate from now into the future.
Yeah.
And the one thing we do know about humanity looking backwards rather than looking forwards is people tend to revert back to normative behavior. And as I said, I'm a New Yorker. I was in New York during 9/11. And I remember when everyone said no one will ever fly again after 9/11. And by 2014, there were more people flying than had ever flown before. So we are absolutely entering a phase where we are in a next normal. And until we have a vaccine, we are going to have to think through a very different operating model. But I think that once people feel comfortable coming back and experiencing exhibitions in person,
Right.
that is still going to be the modus operandi for museums. It doesn't mean we don't have to think about digital outreach and digital packaging, but I still don't see that being the primary driver of the business model, right? Or the primary driver of our content production. I think it's sort of secondary.
Yeah, I mean, we see a lot of these spontaneous collection of artists or artists from home or museum from home, those kinds of social media hashtag pop up. And in some ways, those are providing new ways of engaging maybe a sector of the community that might not have been that interested in museum and artworks before.
Yeah, so I think that's right. I also think though so the broader insight that museums and all other content producers need to internalize is not, oh, we need to leverage this platform. It is to really understand how people consume on that platform, right? What
Correct.
is the nature of how, it's not just about putting things on Instagram. It's how do people engage the content on Instagram, right? It's understanding why binging on Netflix is so exciting, right? Or so it's so popular, right? Like what is it about that behavior, and how do you tap into that? So here I'll give you an example, right? Which is just an observation. So museums do a lot of programs, and so some museums are better than others at recording those programs, and they will have this deep archive of content. We've already alluded to some of those museums, and we've done a pretty good job of that in Toledo. But if you think about what you watch on Netflix, you love series. So now think about museums, think about programs as one-offs, right? But if you were thinking about your program not just as a one-off physical experience, but also as something that had a digital life thereafter, maybe you would want to think about serialized production.
Correct. Yes.
You would want programs that are scaffolded and have story arcs and build on each other. Right? So there are of course sort of lecture series that do that, but what would that look like in other arenas of museum programming? So I think those are the questions that accrue from this moment, where museums don't just think about how do you take something and translate it into digital, but how do you produce a brand new set of content that is considerate of the use of the platform you're trying to distribute on.
What's interesting that you mentioned is that the museum obviously curates that experience, but also when you're at home, it requires a whole new set of constraints, right? That actually artists are, maybe those are new constraints that artists of the future might be thinking about. And that requires designing around them.
I think so. I think that's right. I mean, it's hard to imagine what the art that comes out of COVID that is enduring will look like. But certainly, there are filmmakers and photographers, award-winning, internationally renowned ones that have started doing their work on iPhones, right? So there's a democratization of infrastructure as well. I'm struck by how many how many video artists from 10 years ago were anticipating TikTok, right? And the sort of short attention, very dramatic, right? Incredibly aggressive movements. It'll be really interesting to see where we go from here.
So maybe shifting gears a little bit from the virtual. The museum obviously has spent a long time thinking about expanding physical space in the neighborhood into the 40-acre master plan, right? Will that vision be shifted? Will that be bolstered? And what is the importance of that physical public space on an urban planning scale in the middle of this crisis?
Sure. Yeah, great question. So certainly the idea that the museum campus, so I've already alluded to the museum as an anchor institution, and the museum's campus is an incredibly strategic set of parcels for Toledo, right? We are halfway between ProMedica Hospital and downtown. We are arguably one end of downtown and a gateway from the Collingwood exit. We are so close to Mercy and connected by just a few blocks from all of the great energy that's running up and down Adams Street. Any physical improvements to the museum campus and any contribution to generating energy, which pushes towards downtown and helps with the continued revitalization of those corridors, is most welcome. There is uncertainty in the macroeconomic environment, which is undeniable. So that is something that we will be looking closely at. But, as far as the master plan is concerned, at the core of every plan are great principles, right? Are principles and values that the plan seeks to articulate. And a master plan, which is an architectural and spatial one, seeks to find physical manifestation of those values. The sequencing and phasing of those projects is something that we're going to look at very closely, particularly against the backdrop of COVID.
Right.
But the principles are things that you should expect us to continue to live out in our programming. So there are ambitious building plans articulated in that master site plan, but the core value is to turn the museum campus into a park. That's something that the Bloc Party already gestures towards, and the community should expect to see more of such activities. So we're going to look closely at the master plan, and we're going to be very intentional about how we sequence any phasing of it. But for now, our focus is really on managing through COVID, reopening in a safe way for the community, developing our first strategic plan, and once that is done, really taking a breath and activating those principles, developing use of the campus, observing the use of that campus, and then taking a view of how the master plan might be introduced and implemented thereafter.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that the campus plan is to make a museum into a park, because parks are one of the only things that are really open now for any kinds of social engagement. And I imagine that one of the principles moving forward for the museum to safely reopen is to provide that kind of space for the public to if not congregate, but at least enjoy some kind of sense of collectiveness together, right? To be together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you hit the nail on the head, Ruth. Look, so the sculpture garden is open, right? And anyone listening or watching this, you can go to the Toledo Museum of Art right now. You can walk around outdoors and you can see world-class works of art in the Wells Sculpture Garden. I would encourage everyone to do so. So this is a huge advantage for institutions that have campuses and have outdoor facilities. Some of them have put those facilities behind walls, right, or behind paid gates, right? Ours is freely available. So come on down and check out our wonderful Marc de Souverault blubber, the tire swing, right, or the Jean Maclens either in front of the museum or at Monroe Street and Collingwood intersection. I mean, there were some wonderful things to see. However, right, and then as far as the campus goes, certainly the campus will feature in our reopening plans, and a lot of data indicates that people feel really comfortable being outdoors, even in spite of the stay-at-home order, which is still in effect in Ohio. But as we look forward, we also think it's important to open the galleries and to open the main building. We feel an obligation to this community. Right? We are Toledo's Museum of Art. We are a space that is large, where social distancing is possible. The reopening will be of a kind which is different than a normal museum experience, but we know that we can balance our obligation to this community to serve as a respite space, a space to come together, a space to heal some of the psychological trauma of COVID, with safety and security of our staff, our volunteers, and our visitors. That those two things can be balanced, and that we are working towards a reopening that will allow anyone to come and visit, and it will allow each of those people to feel safe in doing so.
We know from history that human crises have spurred changes in art, music, culture, society in revolutionary ways. Obviously, tragedies in particular in the world from the wars have led to a lot of depiction changes, fragmentation in art that we can see. Do you think that we will see a similar shift after the global crisis like COVID-19? Or will that influence the way that the institution chooses exhibitions to show to the public?
So I think there's an ongoing conversation about the nature of exhibitions going forward, because there is a lot of uncertainty around transportation in particular as a consequence of COVID. So I do think there is a very real effect on sort of the operational realities of doing exhibitions. And with any group of creative people, when you give them constraints, they come up with really creative solutions within those constraints. So I think some of the changes related to exhibitions will be content related, which is sort of more your question, but I also wouldn't discount how people will respond to new constraints introduced by travel restrictions. But sort of to answer the specific, I think, intent of the question, undoubtedly there will be changes, right?
Yeah.
Undoubtedly there will be changes. So, but I don't know that we can forecast exactly how, because we don't know what the long-term effects of COVID will be. And I'll go back to an example I used earlier. Let's take 9/11, right? The trauma of that day resulted in some, really wonderful works of art that responded to that day. I think of, say, Spencer Finch's installation at the 9/11 Memorial Museum that has this almost mosaic of different blues that represent all the colors of the sky on 9/11, all the different blues, right, of the sky on 9/11. It's a magnificent thing. So there will be poignant works of art that respond to the immediate human toll that COVID-19 has taken. But I'm sure you're following, as many of your listeners and viewers are, the interesting artworks that are being made around data and privacy.
Right.
I'm not sure that on the 12th of September, anyone would have said the ongoing effect of 9/11 and all of our daily lives would have been data privacy. Right? But it spawned an entire, as a consequence of sort of government intrusion, right, et cetera. It spawned and access to rich data sets and AI, right? It spawned a whole body of digital art that you can draw sort of a direct line back to 9/11 on. But who on the 12th or the 13th or the 14th of September would have said, right, that is going to be the artistic legacy, right? The lingering effect and artistic legacy of this terrible day. So there will undoubtedly be an effect because artists are responsive to social reality, and there will be changes to social fabric that accrue because of COVID-19. But it's beyond me to be able to forecast what those will be.
Right. But there is some kind of artistic resiliency that we're all anticipating, regardless of what may come.
I think so.
Yes.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I mean, I think that we're all really eager to find a way back and to safely, let's say, but also still in a sense of togetherness, visit the museum. What might the future museum goer expect in terms of like safety, and what are some of the protocols that you guys are just contemplating now for the reopening?
Yeah, so all of our reopening protocols are going to be in alignment with local, state, federal guidelines and the relevant agencies, the CDC, OSHA, et cetera. And I preface, my answer with that because we are awaiting guidance from the governor on when we can open. Right. So the prerequisite for our being able to open is the governor of Ohio saying it's okay to open. So when we are approved to open, we will announce all of these things publicly, and we will announce holistically rather than piecemeal how we are working to keep our visitors safe.
Right.
What I can share with you today is that in addition to leveraging our internal expertise, and we have a considerable amount of operational expertise, including, incidentally, in environmental health and safety operations, we are going the extra mile to consult with external expertise to make sure that every box has been checked and that no stone has been left unturned. So to give but one example, I don't know of an office space which isn't rearranging furniture, putting in plexiglass barriers, doing all the things required to keep office workers socially distant and safe from COVID. But we are also working with infectious disease experts to come in and help us make those layouts. Right. So we are not just making our best guesses. We are bringing in the actual experts who do this within healthcare systems to do it with us as well. So that is the commitment we can make. We exist for the public trust, and we take our responsibility very seriously. So when we say it is safe to reopen, it is going to be because we have done every piece of diligence possible to make sure that your safety and the safety of the people you come to the museum with is being looked after.
I think that as one of the only and the most quality and free public space, and one of the world's renowned art museums. I think we're extremely lucky to be able to have the Museum of Art here and to be able to access it as a public. So everything that you're doing is really with the entire community in mind. And yeah, I believe that, we hope that as COVID-19 and the crisis that comes with all of these, all of the problems that come with the crisis, I believe that there will be this kind of resilience and creativity that issues possibility from this situation. And so thank you so much. Yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you, Ruth.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really, really appreciated the conversation. And I believe that in art, there's the strength, from home and a belief in a shared experience that is a national experience and that is unifying in some ways as well as representative of our daily lives here. So thank you again.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, and thanks for all you do.
Thank you so much again for joining us on this episode of The Midpoint. I really enjoyed the conversation with Adam about the emergent opportunities and deep engagements that are possible despite our current limitations in the pandemic. Even if the future still lays uncertain for all of us, we hope that the story that comes out at the end in history is one of innovation and resilience. If you like this conversation, give us a like, share this episode, and subscribe to our weekly newsletter. As always, stay safe, stay healthy, stay human.